fall under it. So that's the official reason. And to change that, they would need to lift martial law, which then would essentially be saying that the country is no longer in conflict. Now, that is the reason. Quickly changed his mind, and there is a lot of reasons behind that, because a lot has changed since he made that statement. Now, the Committee of Voters in Ukraine say that this is about political calculation. This is a body that wants to defend the rights of people to be able to go to. Difficult to understand why. It's estimated the election would have cost some $200 million. And as we know, funds from the West aren't easy to get for Ukraine at the moment. And when Zelensky was asked, well, why doesn't Ukraine pay for its own elections? He said, and I'm quoting here, I won't take money.
We all realize that now it is wartime when there are many challenges. It is absolutely irresponsible, somehow so frivolous, to throw the subject of elections into society. We must understand that this is a time of defense, a time of battle on which the fate of the state and the people depends, and not a time for throw-ins which only Russia expects from Ukraine. I believe that now is not the time for elections.
What elections is concerned in Ukraine, this is a domestic matter of Ukraine, so not for me to comment.
Ultimately, these are questions for the Ukrainian people to decide. We want to see presidential elections and all elections in Ukraine, but we recognize that it's a difficult thing to conduct in the middle of the war. So it's a very difficult issue to work through, and ultimately it's a decision for the Ukrainian people to make.
Well, not the time is what they're saying, but for Ukrainians under their constitution, it would have been the time for an election. And not everybody agrees with that sentiment. We know that there is a growing movement, particularly amongst the Republican politicians in the US, who say if you can't provide an election, if you can't say that you are a democratically elected leader, then perhaps we should not be giving you under the threat of attacks coming from Ukraine. We also know that one person died in one of the voting areas as a result of an attack on that day. So despite the fact that there were clear threats on that day, the election went ahead. People in those incorporated regions were able to vote for the person they wanted to be Russia's president. And we saw that people, according to the Election Commission, went there in incredibly high numbers and turned out to cast their ballots. At the same time, Ukraine is saying that it's under threat and it can't hold an election. And it's interesting how you've got this one sense of the West saying, no, they can't hold elections because there's a threat. We understand what Ukraine is saying.
Not being free and fair elections, no OSCE observation, highly restricted environment, which is diplomatically what I can say, but more than that, this election has been based on repression and intimidation.
The recent elections in Russia were an election without a choice. The election process not only shows Putin's nefarious actions against his own people, but also against the United Nations Charter.
These days, the Russian dictator is simulating another election. Everyone in the world understands that this figure, as has often happened in history, has simply become addicted to power and is doing everything he can to rule forever. There is no legitimacy in this imitation of elections, and there cannot be.